This might work too.
Yeah, we got a second shot today. 10:45 today.
I was going to say, this is really little. Fuck this. I would either.
Lay your head or your feet.
So much happier right now. Yeah, that's how I felt about it. Still very much but I felt it was so hard not to sing, you know? And then our good friend and I'm like, that's gonna be just sitting there just like
We've been trying to get it for like secrets? I saw your boots flying out.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? If I can get your attention for just an hour. I'd like everyone to come in and get seated. I can see that a lot of us are being sensible and doing social distancing. That's pretty much out of the ordinary for our family. I keep trying to explain to the people at Levitt's that my family is the family shows up with a mask in one hand and a hug in the other. There's not much social distancing in this group, so. But I appreciate everyone coming to greet us and be with us and share the love and emotions that always brings our family together. We appreciate that. So I'm going to officiate here and at the cemetery, but I'd like to call the meeting to order so that we have time for the services. This is not the typical service for a funeral, but Dad was not the typical subject of a funeral. People who know my dad knew what his attitude was about that. We are certainly going to miss him. So the services will go as follows. We will have an opening prayer by Julian Geiger. We will have an obituary reading by Claire Geiger. We will have a couple of speakers. Kurt Geiger will speak, Bob Geiger will speak, and Julian Still will speak. At the end of this service, we'll have a closing prayer by Emily's husband, Alex Bernier. We're so glad that you're here. When we complete the services here, the mortuary service people will call the pallbearers to order. Pallbearers will be Chris Geiger, Alex Steele, Brad Geiger, Noah Geiger, Bob Geiger, and Frieden Geiger. We do have honorary pallbearers: Benjamin Geiger, Martin Paul Geiger, and Nathan Geiger. They will be with us in spirit, and we miss them too. So at this time, I would like to turn the service over to Cammie Geiger for an opening prayer.
Our dear Heavenly Father, as we gather here to celebrate the life of Julian Emmett Geiger, our father, grandfather, great-grandfather, who we love so much, we are so grateful for the lessons he taught, for the strength that he showed us through his life, and so incredibly grateful that he is now reunited with Norma and Marty and Nathan and Ben and all of his extended family and friends. Father, I ask a special blessing upon Kurt and Kendall and Claire and Julie as they mourn the passing of their dad, that they might be comforted in the days to come. And I ask these favors and blessings in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. I would like to call Claire Geiger to come up and read the obituary.
Our beloved father, Julian E. Geiger Jr., lived well and was an example to family and friends alike. Now the cycle of life has brought him back to his eternal family and united him with the love of his life, Norma Kendall Geiger. Julian was born to Julian E. Geiger Sr., known to his friends and neighbors as Pop Geiger, and Elizabeth Moyes Geiger, and resided at 3040 Porter Avenue in Ogden. He had two older sisters, Marion and Gertrude. Everybody knew Gertrude as Trudy. In 1927, Porter Avenue and 30th Street in Ogden were dirt roads. Julian went to Ogden High School up on Harrison Boulevard, and the people wondered why they built a high school way up on the mountain so far from town. Dad met and married a beautiful girl from Uinta, Norma Kendall, who went to Weaver High School. They married in April of 1946. A marriage into the Kendall family grew the family ties exponentially. After Dad's stint in the U.S. Navy, they went on to have 5 children. Kurt Geiger married to Cameron Shepard and 3 boys. Kendall Geiger married to Diane Tingy with 3 children. Claire, with a father of 2. Marty Geiger, who's deceased, and their daughter Julianne Geiger married to Brad Still with 2 children. Dad was actually our family patriarch. Mom and Dad raised their children very deliberately. They nurtured, loved, and taught us the ways expected and values by the great generation. Dad had the same temperament socially and in his work environment, and for that reason Dad's work flourished, and our neighborhood and friends were like a Norman Rockwell lithograph. Dad enjoyed success as vice president of CUNA Mutual. His work called for the family to move to Colorado in 1967. Our youngest brother, Marty Paul, died there in 1970. The loss of Marty bonded our family even more. Mom and Dad taught us that neither distance nor time could ever come between or diminish our love. They continued to move elsewhere. Dad would continue to move anywhere Dad's career took him. They then moved to Phoenix, Arizona, Honolulu, Hawaii, and to California. With every move, Dad and Mom always saw the future and looked to the horizon. They cherished our growing families, kept us all together, and showed us how to overcome setbacks and losses by maintaining family unity and support. After retiring, Dad and Mom lived well and were active. Mom's health was tenable, but allowed Dad to indulge his love of aviation. He built a tandem seat sports airplane called a Dragonfly. He flew as long as he could, maintain his pilot's license, and fly safely. Julian and Norma moved back to Ogden, bought a beautiful home and a handsome fifth wheel, and spent many years seeing America together. Dad lost Norma in 1999 after over 50 years of marriage and a loss of a son and grandson that devastated Dad. He kept keeping with his character. Dad moved to assist a friend and a neighbor, Charlene Chuck Thompson, as she battled cancer until her death. Soon after that, Dad was off on a new adventure and traveled until finally landing in Queen Valley, Arizona, where he lived on a golf course for several years. While there, he took time away from the summer heat to cruise the oceans and the great rivers of Europe. Dad moved back to Ogden in 2019 to be with his family. He had 10 grandchildren and 17 great-grandchildren. He continued to enjoy his passion for golf with his sons, extended family, and friends. And in his 90s, Dad still had a remarkable golf game. His only downfall was that he lost his ability to count. Julian was married to Dorothy Wiscombe and separated nearly 2 years ago. Dad died peacefully at home, surrounded by his family that will forever love, respect, and admire him. A brief graveside service is planned for today out at the UN Cemetery. The family and friends can meet at 2 o'clock to say goodbye to Dad.
Thanks, Claire. Now I'll turn the mic over to Julian's oldest son, quite a bit older than the rest of us. And he will be the first speaker.
I was stewed for a couple of days over what I would say about my dad, because there were so many different sides of him. And so I decided to narrow it down to a particular point and attitude that my dad had and share it with you. Members of the family, especially Kendall and Claire, will recognize the man I'm about to talk about. There was a movie out, and this is kind of an add to my statement today, but there was a movie out a long time ago called Big Fish, and the story of a kid whose father had died, and his father had told him all these incredible stories all life about him, living with the giant he met and all these kind of things. And sure as heck at his dad's funeral, the Big Fish stories came through the door, having been absolutely true. Well, one of the stories that I thought was a Big Fish story was my dad always presented himself as a tough guy, okay? And scared my friends to death when they come by my house. I had a good friend, Randy Burns and Kerry Lindgren and Ron Jones, that all came down, and they were afraid of my dad. And I thought, why are you so afraid of my dad? You know, but it just was. And Dad always had me a little bit unnerved of what he could do. So as we're getting ready today, the first person to come through the door is this old man. And he's coming down with a cane. I didn't know who he was, so I walked over to him and introduced myself. And his name was Keith, and I can't remember what he's like. Steed. And he said, I said, how did you know my dad? And he said, I'm the first person he punched in the nose. And I said, really? What? He said, when I say that I'm the first one, I mean, I'm the first one. And because your dad was able to take care of himself, but he did it to me when we were in the first grade. And he said, I don't remember what I did, but wham, your dad punched me in the nose. And he said, and I've always adored your dad, and loved your dad, and thought the world of him, and I had to be here. And I wish that he had stayed, but the big fish story of my dad being a tough guy ends up to have some truth to it, as Mr. Steve pointed out to him. And there was good reason for my friends to beware of my dad. What I want to point out is a side of my dad that is the part that I remember the most and that affected me the most in my life is my dad was a teacher. Every dinner we ever had at our house was a place for him to teach life lessons and challenge the way we thought, challenge what we were doing. We always had an encyclopedia and a dictionary there, and so our dinners were full of what happened today, and what do you think of this, and well, go get the encyclopedia and let's look it up and see what the deal is. Go grab the dictionary and check on this word and what this word means. And so that was a continual thing my whole life was that. It challenged me a lot because when you're being challenged all the time, sometimes it's hard on you, when your dad is pushing you to get you to think and pushing you to get you to understand what's going on, not letting you just say, this is what I think. He'd make you prove it. And so that part sometimes were tearful for me when you're being challenged that hard. There were two other players. As mentioned, the Kendall family was a big part of our life. And my Uncle Jay was my dad's little brother, but there were two people in there that loved to debate with my dad. One was Clyde Parker, and they were constantly debating, and I got to watch and listen to their debates. And that was pretty much on an academic side all the time, because Clyde went on to get his doctorate degree and all the things that he did. My dad never went, just barely finished high school, joined the Navy, and came back and went about his life. And Clyde got a doctorate degree, and Clyde often said that Julian Geiger is the smartest man I've ever met that didn't go to college. I mean, he knew so much about so many things. The other person in there is Leah Jacobs. And Leah Jacobs and my dad butted heads a lot over religious principles and things like that. And my dad had his opinion, Leah had her opinion, and I didn't know exactly how Dad and Leah left it, okay? Because they had some real challenging times. And years after my Aunt Leah died, there was an article in one of the church magazines that mentioned the name of Leah Jacobs. And my dad went into tears just hearing Leah's name. Obviously, while they butted heads over things, he loved her, or he wouldn't have just sobbed when he heard the name Leah Jacobs. My dad was a teacher, and when Kendall and I were just young boys, he came to us one day and he said, I've got a job for you. And we said, what's that? He said, I want you to go sell donuts. Go door to door and sell donuts. And I thought it was way too cool to be a donut boy. I'm in the 7th grade and I'm going to go door to door selling donuts. But Dad insisted that Kendall and I do that. I had no idea what this was going to lead to. But he gave us a little sales pitch on what we were supposed to do. We went down to Doug's Donut Shop, which was located on 24th and Kiesel, filled our little basket of donuts up, went up and walked across the street. I thought, oh, my friends are all going to see me here as the donut boy going across the street. In fact, I tried to get Kendall to walk on a certain side of me so nobody could see that Kurt was a donut boy. But there was a lesson in humility that my father wanted me to learn. He wanted me to learn how to knock on a door and feel rejection. He wanted me to learn how to smile at people and present myself in a proper way that would induce them to buy donuts from me. He wanted me to learn where profits come from. Kendall and I soon learned that the last bag in the donut bag was your profit. Everything up to there, you're just covering your overhead. And so if you don't sell the last bag, you didn't make any money that day, which we made $1.10. That's how much Kendall and I made off of 4 hours of knocking on doors. And then I learned the lesson that, and I didn't want anybody to know I was a donut boy, but I went up to a house one day and I said, my name's Kurt Geiger, and I sell donuts for Doug's Donuts Shops down at 24th and Keyslow. And I have a wonderful bag of them. And she reached down, picked them up, scrunched them like this, threw them back in, she said, they're old. And shut the door. I thought, that's my profit. You just destroyed what I did for the last 3 hours. So I walked across the street, knocked on the door, asked people if I'd like to come in, I called the police. So the police came, and I don't know whether the policeman or the lady bought the donuts. So I felt pretty good. I got my profit, put a dime in the bus to get myself back home, went home. Sunday morning I wake up, big article in the Standard Examiner, donut boy calls police. So the whole city knew that I sold donuts. And, but that job, and I won't take you step by step through it, but I can show you a direct correlation, step by step, to where I ended up working the final job in my life as in the ski industry as the president of the company. I can show you I met this person, that met through person, and walked my way all the way to that. So Dad's lesson was absolutely correct. Another lesson that he taught me was I sold, and this again his teaching, I got a job as a paper boy, and I was a paper boy for the Deseret News. And in Ogden, that's the Standard Examiner country, so I had 50 people on my route, which in all of Washington Territory. So the Deseret News had this contest that anybody could get 50 new subscriptions to the Deseret News. They would take a trip and go to Knott's Berry Farm. And I looked at that, and Dad's, I don't know, he said, come here. Put me in the car, drove me down to the Greyhound bus depot. We got out of the car, so I want you to go get on that bus. Okay, so I want you to count every seat, how many seats are in that bus. And I went in and came back out, and I don't remember it was 40 or 45. And he said, do you think they believe that 40 or 45 people can do this? And I thought, he said, they must, or they wouldn't have rented such a big bus. So if 40 or 45 people can do this, son, so can you. And lo and behold, he pushed me, and I sold it, and I got to go to Knott's Berry Farm. That was a lesson my dad taught. Okay. One time when I was in high school, a friend and I decided we were going to sneak in to the drive-in. So we had our dates to drive into the drive-in. We were out of the motor view, out in South Weaver, Uinta area. My friend and I hopped the fence on the top, came down the hill, went and got in the car, and we got caught sneaking in. They called my dad, called the police, and the police called my dad. They came out, and my dad walked in and volunteered that I would, for 3 weeks, every Sunday, clean the drive-in as punishment for doing that. And you have no idea what a mess the drive-in is on Saturday or Sunday morning when you get there. There's bags of popcorn and things, so that's what I had to do. But guess who showed up with me? It was Julian Geiger. And he said, I figured the only reason you did that is I didn't teach you properly. So you and I are going to clean this drive-in every Sunday for the next 3 weeks, and he did. There's a story that is told to me that I wasn't there, but my mother passed it on to me, is that Dad and her and I think some of my younger siblings were on a vacation together, and they were seeing money as they traveled down. So Dad would pull over, and there was money was coming out. So Dad started to gather up this cash. And just delivered, found the guy down the highway that was on a motorcycle, and the back of his pack had opened up, and his money was blowing out. Julie's affirming this. His money was flowing out. Well, my dad, there was no way he could keep somebody else's money. Found the guy, made sure he got the money back and had it. And that's a lesson from Julian Geiger. So he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk in the way he lived his life. There are other two huge events. One is when my mother was 35 years old and my little sister was just a little girl. she came down with the disease. And she got up to go to work one morning and tried to put lipstick on her face, and she couldn't get the lipstick on her face. By the time she got to the front porch, she was on her way to work. She couldn't go down the steps, and by that evening, she was in an oxygen tent to save her because she was in such bad shape. And 2 or 3 days later, I don't remember how long it was, they brought Mom home. And Mom was going to be the rest of her life paralyzed from the waist down. And when she brought her home, her face was all droopy, and we had a tough time, at least I did, looking at my mom that way, because I'd never seen my mom ill in that manner. But my dad just grabbed hold of that whole situation and dealt with it as he deals with everything in his life, and that's that can-do-it attitude. And I remember that Grandma Kendall, Nellie, would come to our house and take care of Mom so Dad could go to work in the day. And then he'd come home in the evening and come in, and he walked in one time and Grandma Kendall announced that Mom had made it to the bathroom by herself. And he turned to Grandma Kendall and said, "I don't want you back here again. You go home. My wife's going to get up. We're going to live a life. And we're going to do just fine. I don't want to make her dependent on anything. If she can get to the bathroom today, she can get to the bathroom for the rest of her life. So she's not going to be dependent." And the way they kind of worked the thing, my mother with him, he'd grown and elevated in his business to the point that they went to a lot of credit union banquets and dinners and things like that. And Mom's legs were locked and her knees. She couldn't bend her knees. The minute her knees broke, down she'd go. So she walked her whole life, always wore a long skirt, so no one could see that she was paralyzed. And when Dad would go over to ask her if you'd like to dance, she'd say, "Of course." My dad would lean down, she'd put her arms around his neck, and he would stand her up. Then they would go out on the dance floor and they would dance, and when they were done, they would go back and he would set her back down in the most incredible, loving way that maintained my mother's dignity. And he was that way every time with my mother the rest of her life, which has been 22 years ago since she passed. It was a true, true love affair. It was the true love of his life was my mother. The other example that I saw from my dad is when my brother Marty died. Marty had been playing in a football game. Something happened, his nose was bleeding, he came off to the side, sat down, put his hands up to his nose like this to stop the nosebleed. By that evening, he was on his way to the hospital. The doctor said, "He's going to be just fine. Go ahead and take him home." And so Dad took him home, and by the following Monday, he was in intensive care in the hospital. And Dad spent one solid month, every day, every night, with Marty. Never left his side. Dad never showed any sign of weakness. Marty knew that he was dying, because back in those days, they had nothing to stop staph. And it was staph infection that he had. But those two teamed up, okay, to finish Marty's life together like an amazing thing to have watched. And my dad didn't come home he just said, "Hey." And he said, "Marty knows he's dying, I know he's dying, and I'm with my son." And and I can't imagine the kind of conversations my dad might have had with my brother, knowing that it was the end of his life, and spending 30 days with him. And the things that they would have talked about, and the things my dad would have shared, and the things that Marty would have shared with my dad. So that was an incredible example of don't do as I say, do as I do. He did what he said in everything in life. When Dad spent that time with him, Dad came home one night, and what had happened is Marty had turned to Dad, who had never left his side, and said, "I really feel good, Dad." They put him in front of a tent, and it was comfortable, and he turned to Dad, he said, "I'd like you to go home and get some sleep." And he said, "You've been here every day, every hour, Dad, go ahead and go home." Dad said, "You think you're all right?" He said, "I think I'm fine." And that day, some friends from his school, he went to Pitt School, and he was voted Mr. Pitts, which is like the student body president of the school. And the kids brought up Marty a sack of candy, and they gave it to him, and that day he poured the candy in his lap and played in the candy. He didn't eat it, but he played in it. Then he put it in the sack and set it aside and sent Dad home. Dad hadn't been home an hour and a half, and the hospital called and said that Marty had died. And I know exactly what that was. There was no way that Marty could die in front of my dad. He couldn't. So we sent him home so he could do it. When I went up to the hospital, the nurse grabbed me and she said, "I got to tell you a story." She said, "Shortly after your father left, not 20 minutes after your father left, he buzzed our desk and he said, 'Will you please come in here? There's all kinds of people in my room and I don't know who they are. And I need you to come in with me, I'm afraid.'" And then shortly after that, she got in the room and he said, "Oh, it's okay. Scotty's here to get me. And I'm all right. Everything's fine." And he laid his head back and died. Well, Scotty was a friend of his at the same age who had died that summer. No one ever knew why. They just found him in a field. But he said, "Scotty came here to get me." Dad was at my house, so we were all around Dad as he was preparing to go, okay? And I could see the struggle that was in my dad as he's getting ready to go. And Kendall had been there, my wife, everybody, the whole family. But Dad was struggling to go. And I said, "Marty, will you please come and get your dad? He was there for you. You need to come and get your dad. It's been 50 plus years, Marty. Come and get Dad." And it wasn't 5 minutes. Dad settled down and was gone. So in my heart, I believe, like Scotty came and got Marty, Marty came and got Dad. I got a couple of other stories real quick. Dad was out kayaking the Boundary Waters with Claire and Marty, and he rolled the canoe. They rolled the canoe. And so they're in the Boundary Waters, which is big water, okay? It's not a little place, and it's cold. And as soon as they hit the water, my dad's attitude became that "I can't do it" attitude, and he turned to my two brothers and he said, "I can't save both of you. I don't want to choose which one of the two of you I save, so swim." That's his attitude in life. The situation is, whether it was my mom being sick or whether my brother situation was, he said, "You better swim, because I don't want to pick which one of the two of you I save." Another example of my dad's can-do-it attitude was back in the late 1960s, nuclear war was the conversation. The Russians and us are going to do this and that. And Dad and Mom had moved over to Colorado. So we were having a family get-together and a conversation. We talked about, what are we going to do if there's a nuclear war? How are we going to get back together? How are we going to find one another? And Dad says, "You guys just stay put. Mom and I will come to you." And I said, "Dad, what if the roads are all shot and you have to walk and Mom's paralyzed?" He says, "We'll walk as far as she can walk, and then we'll stop. And when she gets feeling she can walk again, we'll walk again. We'll get to Utah. It may not be rapidly, but your mother and I will get home." And the point I'm making is we can do this. You can do that. Claire, you can do this. Kendall, you can do that. Julie, you can do this. And that was the way Dad raised us. And it was very matter of fact. And he didn't accept any whining or crying in life. And you got a job to do your job, and it'll all work out. So that's a little part of who my dad was, and the way he treated us, and the way he lived his life. And I thank you for coming today and letting me share that with you. And I told I had two of my grandchildren, Dad's great-grandchildren, Laird and Monroe, were at my house the other day, and I told them some of those stories. And the importance of this to you young people, because I know it now, somebody's going to turn to you someday and say, do you remember your grandpa? Do you remember your great-grandpa? Can you tell me about it? This might be your children or your grandchildren. And you got to be able to tell them a story. You got to be able to say, yeah, I knew. And you fortunately knew your great-grandpa. I never knew mine. So thank you very much. And I'll turn the floor over to someone else.
Thank you. I want you to know the stories he tells are true. So our next speaker will be Julian's grandson, Bob Geiger. So I'll ask Bob to come up.
Well, those were great stories, Dad. Following that's going to be really tough to do. Those are just the best stories. I think I was asked because I'm currently the oldest. The actual oldest is Nathan, who's with Grandpa right now. So I get to do this. Anyway, I got the benefit, Brad and I got the benefit of being around Grandma and Grandpa the most as grandkids. Because when we were kids, Mom and Dad would just drop us off there in California, I guess. I don't know, it just felt like we lived in California every summer for a while. And we loved going there to that house in California. I can still smell Grandma's kitchen. And it smelled like grapefruit and coffee and banana bread. Those three things. And I could just smell it. And we would go there and spend all this great time with them. And what I wanted to talk a little bit about was you would transfer from that kitchen into the garage, and it would turn into the smell of resin and styrofoam and fiberglass, because Grandpa was building his airplane in the garage. And we would go out there and just hang out in the garage with him while he was working on his plane. And he would stop to tell us what he was doing with this airplane and teach us what a fuselage was and what a canard wing was and what, how all of all the instruments would work. And it was so mechanical, and he was doing everything with his own hands out there in the garage. And you would also, the pool was around back, so you could smell the chlorine from the pool. But we would sit in that garage. In fact, we would sleep in that garage too. If you remember, Brad, when we go there, Grandma would put out cots and we would sleep in there. And as soon as the sun would come, we'd run out to the pool. But we were out there one day, and Grandpa's building this beautiful airplane. If you didn't get a chance to see it, it's over against the wall in there. It was the coolest airplane. It wasn't just any old airplane. It was a cool airplane. And we were out there while he was working on it. And he was trying to figure out how to get the wings to balance, because it wasn't sitting balanced in the fuselage. So when it came out, it was kind of off. And it was a hair off. And Grandpa explained to us, if it's a hair off, the plane won't fly right. So we have to figure out how to get it to balance in there. And he said, what do you think we should do? And he was talking to them. We're just little kids. We're like, we don't know, Grandpa. We don't know how to get it to do. He goes, I have an idea. And so every night he ate fudge popsicles. I don't know if everybody remembers this, but he would always eat fudge popsicles in there. And he had in the garbage can a bunch of fudge popsicle sticks. And so he came out and he chopped them up like this. And he goes, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take these fudge popsicle sticks and we're going to shove them in the fuselage, and I'm going to put this glaze over them, and it's going to glue in there, and this will serve as the way to make the plane fly straight. And I was like, you've got this beautiful thing you're building, and we're going to make it fly right with popsicle sticks? And he says, well, it works. And so he did that. And so every time we flew in that plane after that, I knew we were flying on popsicle sticks. And I was like, this is crazy. And it was a tiny little plane. But I knew right under my butt were 4 popsicle sticks. And, Grandpa did that. The other thing that I thought was really cool that he did is one day we were out there playing with the plane. And there's these, on the side, there's this handle that I don't know what it did, but it was part of the controls of the plane. And again, this is a beautiful airplane. The aircraft wasn't something that looked patched together in any way. This is a gorgeous plane. Grandpa was wrestling around and trying to find something. And I said, what are you doing, Grandpa? He's like, we got to figure out how to make a handle for the controls for the plane. And he was just kind of looking around. So we're looking around, and then before he knew it, he pulled out a screwdriver and he hacked the end of the screwdriver off. And he varnished it really nice and he stuck it on the thing. And he goes, I think we can fly the plane with this. I was like, we're going to fly the plane on popsicle sticks and with the handle of a screwdriver. That's what you're going to do at this point? And his answer to us was, well, it works. And so he was just a really practical guy. It didn't need to be fancy. If it worked, it worked. If it didn't, it didn't. And so practicality was such a huge thing to Grandpa, just to live a very practical, straightforward life. And so in some ways, these things would come out later in my life, and they came through my dad. I could hear Grandpa saying it to him, and then my dad saying it to me, which was like we would be kids and we would get hurt. You'd hurt your arm or your elbow, and you'd run into the house and say, "My elbow hurts." And my dad would grab my arm and go like that, and goes, "Does it hurt when you do that?" And I said, "Yeah, it hurts when you do that." And he said, "Well, then don't do that." And Grandpa kind of was that approach. Dad would talk about him being a teacher, but you would go to, at least for me, maybe it was different when you had kids, but for grandkids, you'd go to Grandpa and you would say, I have a question for you, and you were expecting some sort of deliberate answer about how to live your life. You'd say, how should I do this? What's the answer? And you're thinking you're going to get from this guy who's lived all these years an answer. And you never got an answer, you just got a question back. It was always a question back, and he was trying to make you think about your life. And that's the way he did it. He didn't give you the answer, he made you think and make you come up with your own answer. He would do this all the time, and he was always trying to basically say to you, he would ask, when you would sit down with him in the yard or whatever, you would ask him a question about what you should do or how you should live, and he would just say, well, what do you think? Is it working for you? And if you said yes, he'd say, good. And if you said no, just like don't bend your elbow if it hurts, he'd say, then don't do that. Do something else. And his lesson is that life, I think Grandpa kind of viewed life as this really awesome place to just learn from the experience itself, and that it will teach you the answers. It was designed to do it if you're paying attention and you're asking the right questions. And just live a very practical life. You can fly an airplane with popsicle sticks and the handle of a screwdriver. You can do this. And so I'm going to miss him, and I'm going to miss that. I hope that comes through in my life to my kids. I know it came from my dad to me. I know that these lessons have happened. When Dad, you were describing going and selling donuts, it wasn't that long ago, Brad and I were doing the same thing, knocking on doors and saying, hi, I'm Bob Geiger. I'm painting addresses on curves for just $3. Would you like me to paint it with a black background and white letters, or a white-black background and black letters? And we practiced our little pitch and had our little kit, and we did all that. And this stuff just gets passed. And I'm just very grateful for what got passed to me and my brothers and my cousins from Grandpa Geiger. And I feel bad sometimes that some of you didn't get to sit in that plane when it was getting built in that garage, because it was awesome to do that with him and to watch him think, solve, fix, make it work. And I missed that. I'm going to say one last thing. It was always really funny because I knew what we were flying with. that when we go out to the airport to fly with Grandpa, we'd get in the plane and then he'd do touch and goes with us. He'd come down and land, and then he would pick up the next grandchild and do it. And for whatever reason, I thought it was okay that you and I did it, Brad. I was like, maybe Mom and Dad don't care so much about us. But every time Ben got on the plane and took off, I looked at the two of them like, are you really letting this happen? You know, that's flying on popsicle sticks. And so we all did that, and it was a fun time, and I'm going to miss all that, but it's so in here. And I know that the last thing I want to say about it is the most practical statement a person can make is it is what it is. There's just, because that's a fact. You can't escape. And whatever happens after this, it is what it is. And it is, in fact, what it is. And that's what's happening. And Grandpa made you face that reality. And anytime you tried to pull the wool over it and say, I'm going to try to declare that it is what it isn't, his answer was very simple. Suit yourself. And then pretty soon you'd learn that that's not true. You can't live your life that way. And you'd come back and you'd say, how's that working for you? And I'm very grateful for that lesson, and I'm going to try to pass it on. I'm grateful for the life of my grandfather and for everybody in this room who shared it with us. The Kendalls. I love the Kendall side and the Geiger side, the whole thing, it all worked. It was wonderful. I have a similar dynamic with my wife's family. And I'm grateful for it. I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thanks, Bob. Our final speaker will be Julianne Steele, the girl of the family. And we hope that she has a soft spot in her heart, like we do for our father. After Julie concludes her speaking, Alex Bernier will come up and do the closing prayer. I'd like everyone to stay until Alex finishes the closing prayer, because they'll come and call the pallbearers, and when the pallbearers come to move the casket, that's our signal that we can head out to the Uinta Cemetery and convene out there for the grave dedication and to lay Julian to rest. Julie?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. I wanted to add one of the stories to the airplane that Bob started. Brad and I went on our honeymoon to California, and Dad had just moved the airplane out to the Chino airport and was doing some tests out there. Brad and I believe drove my mother's Mercedes out to the Chino airport to see the airplane and what Dad was doing. Well, Dad wanted to rev up the engine on that airplane to see how it would do, and he wanted to tie the airplane to something so it wouldn't take off. It had to stay stationary. So he tied it to my mother's beautiful Mercedes. So Brad and I got a kick out of that. It was like, don't tell Mom. Anyway, without my brother's knowledge, I had some lyrics of a song put on the back of the program today. I figured when your name is Julianne and you're named after your dad, and you're the only girl, and you're the baby, that gave you privilege to put whatever you wanted on the back of the program. Well, the lyrics was sung years ago. I don't know if you've heard of Donna Lewis, and it's about my dad's blue eyes. And every time I ever listened to that song, it was fun and upbeat, but it also made me cry because I featured my mom and dad's love story and how she would look into my dad's bright blue eyes. And I can see today, too, how Christopher got them and Julian Beck got those blue eyes. And so I just know that my mom was madly in love with those blue eyes when she met him. COVID season was really long for my dad. It's been long for everybody, but it was especially long for Dad. I took the role, the window visits, and FaceTiming my dad. We became really good buddies over this time. I went from being called a brat, and you're a real sweetheart, to one of Dad's buddies. I felt like I had arrived. We reminisced about Mother, Marty, hanging wallpaper, which I believe the police were called that day, to 1290 Brenda Court, as Mom and Dad were trying to hang wallpaper in the entryway. We talked about Disneyland trips, the Rose Bowl parade. Then there was the time, and Claire will help me remember this. We're in Hawaii, I believe it was a Sunday mid-morning. Dad had begged Mom to just take time from cleaning the house and let's go on a little tour. We'll just go for 1 hour on the sailboat, just for 1 hour, honey. Give up the cleaning. Well, the 1 hour tour turned into about a 7 or 8 hour tour. And they ended up not being able to get back in. They got out in the ocean, and I believe they called Claire to come with a trailer and pick them up at Waikiki Boat Harbor because they couldn't make it back into the Hawaii Kai Harbor. Is that what you remember? And Claire had to go down and pick them up, and they left without water, without sunscreen. And when they pulled my mom to shore, a boat had towed them in, another bigger boat towed them in to get them in. And my mom said a beer had never tasted so good in her whole life. She was pretty thirsty. Anyway, the other thing that Dad and I talked about was the other woman. That other woman that my dad had, I would call down to California after the dinner hour. And I'd say, "What are you doing, Mom?" "Oh, I just finished dinner, just cleaning up." And I'd say, "Where's Dad?" "Well, he's in the garage with the other woman, building the airplane." The dragonfly my mom referred to as the other woman. My dad, something that's very important to me, was living in Hawaii and the great times we have and how much my dad valued that 3 years, and my mother, and Claire and I in Hawaii. We have placed a green leaf lei around my dad's neck. In Hawaii, the lei was a common symbol of love, friendship, celebration, honor, and greeting. Departing visitors would throw the lei into the ocean as they were passing Diamond Head, in hope they, like the lei, would return to the beautiful islands. So my dad, you have returned home. I love you. I love you so much. Aloha, your buddy Julie. Thanks, and I want to thank Claire, Kendall, Kurt, Bob, for saying such great things and reminding everybody about Dad.
Our dear kind Heavenly Father, we're so very grateful that we can be here as family and friends. We're grateful for this time that we have on this earth to create memories and experience the joys and the trials and tribulations. And we're grateful for Julian and his smile and his laugh. Grateful for the memories that we have with him. And we ask you to please help us to use those to stay close with each other and to be united as family and to spread that love to those around us. We're very grateful for all the many blessings that we do have, and we're thankful for our Savior, Jesus Christ. Father, we ask you to please bless us that we might be able to move forward and find joy in all that we do. And we say these things in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
May I have those gentlemen who are serving as our casket bearers step forward, please?
We went down last week, first time back for a year. But I've been going backlight, yeah.
Girlfriend.
I'm gonna talk. You guys aren't